you guys just don't know. And there was so much bad advice going about. It was also the time when, regrettably, education changed, and you had whole ecosystems of further education and people getting grants. And then suddenly that changed, and you had to start doing vocational courses and things, and nobody wants to do those, particularly at our age. You just want to go and enjoy ourselves. We'll start bringing some of that glaze over. Let's get rid of that ultramarine going here. I can see it. Let's start to cool down our sheep a little bit here as well. A bit of modelling on the sheep down the middle of his face there, perhaps. I'll drag that through now a bit. Slightly strong down there. So we're starting to get the effect of light coming through. Start loose, gradually tighten up. I'm the one that's in control, and I'm the one that's can say when it stops, when it starts. And as this gradually dries, I can add more and more as a standard watercolour. I've got to go dark enough. I mustn't be tempted to paint it as a normal watercolour, because the pastel won't show. Although I can go darker with the pastel as well, it's not going to. Don't be afraid to experiment. If I show you this technique, later on, go and have a play with your pastels and just see what you can do with them. If it gets overworked, you can always work over with more pastel still. Okay, let's take our break then, shall we? And we'll come back into this in a minute with the pastels. You'll be surprised that will suddenly bring it out. That'll be all right? Yeah. That's another problem. When I paint, I tend to paint like a sword fencer. Long brushes, and I reach out. Not the watercolour so much, but I paint from a distance because I'm painting broken colour most of the time. So therefore I need to be able to get back from the painting to see it. Here I'm working across and I can't see what I'm doing. This is why I'm using hot press paper now, is because I wanted a smoother surface paper. Normally I'd use a rough on a snow scene, but because of the sheep I didn't want that. I like to really look for colours and pull them out of it. We were just talking, one of the gentlemen just now was saying to me about skies. When you're taking photographs, you tend to find that the sky will either be too bright and then it'll bleach out, which is the usual one, and you see the landscape, or you focus on the sky and it's all right, and then the landscape's too dark. So it's usually wise to try and take 2 photographs every time you take a shot if you're going to paint from it, because you want to focus the light meter on the sky and get a good sky, and then go down and get the land as well, and perhaps take one of both. When I'm teaching, I usually find that I'm dealing with 3 problems. The first one is that they were told at primary school they were no good, and it stays with you forever. The next one is you've got an older brother or sister who's better than you. And the third one, that's the most difficult for me as a teacher, is you've got an idea about what good art is. And it may be that that's not you naturally. So you might want to paint photorealism, you might be naturally an impressionist or the other way around. It isn't for me as a teacher to change you. It is for me to try with experience and help you, guide out of you who you naturally are and will really enjoy. But anybody who comes to me and wants to paint a certain way, I'll help them do it. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't ask people to paint like me. I'm just showing you ways here. This isn't how to paint. This is just other ways of painting. This is just to help you enjoy. I paint in all sorts of different ways. You see what I mean about the watercolour and the lights and darks now, that you can play backwards and forwards. And now the washes that I did, the stronger they were, the more my pastel would show. Now, if I had a rough paper, you could imagine the texture I'd be getting with the snow now. Yeah? So the watercolour was only a foundation. It was only to get rid of a paper, which is what I do when I'm doing the acrylic ink ones of gardens. It just loses the... Is it looking reasonable back there? It's sort of starting to work. You get the idea, good. I hope that, I get so involved with it, I hope you see I'm enjoying doing this, because there's absolutely no point in painting if you're not going to enjoy it. Don't struggle too much. If I'm doing a demo, I'm always exploring. I hate to do the same thing over and over again. I always try to differ what I do slightly every time I do it, because otherwise I'd get bored. Dots and dashes. Feel the marks you're making. You're looking at a surface, and it goes through your eyes, through the brain, out to the fingertips. So your fingertips should be feeling the surface that you're touching. it doesn't matter how good a drawing you do. If you draw a tram line around an object, it'll be flat. The edge of what you're drawing must be about the edge of the object you're drawing. So if it's a very broken old rusty tin can, it's got to be a broken line. If it's a smooth line gently going around a glass, it's a smooth line. And that will give you form even before you start shading. There's a little bit the same here. I'm not copying the marks exactly. I'm making them about what's going on here. And if I wanted to be exact, I could be. Of course, you know I could be. That's not what I'm aiming to do. I just wanted to get the atmosphere and the feeling of this thing. Yeah, you don't ask many questions this group, do you? Spellbound what I'm doing. I'm just going to go back a little bit and see what I've got there. Stay. Because I can't see from so close up. Yes, it needs... the darks need to be quite a bit darker in places to really bring this out. But the idea tonight, as I say, is to give you the idea of how it works. You can see how this could work for you. And it's not just with this method. You can use this method just the same for doing landscapes and things, because you can put those lights back in. You can put in a lovely big sky with sides of pastels, you know, painted all in loose. So if you've got those old watercolours at home that haven't worked, then please don't be afraid to now have a go at them and go back on them. And I want this shimmering effect of light coming through. And by going so loosely, I can now tighten up more and more and more as much as I wish to. I'm again one that's in control.
For your own paintings, do you prefer studio or on-site? I suppose it depends where it is.
It depends what you're doing as well, but I think you learn more and get more by painting from life. There's nothing like being out there on a wonderful day, and even on a bad day. One of the most fun times I had was in a thunderstorm on one of the islands of the Hebrides. Again, you see it on the front. But I'm doing a water and pastel. And it just came down like a deluge. The river came. And I was actually using, I didn't need any water. I was just using the brush pastels and the rain pouring down on me, getting absolutely drowned. And it worked. It was great fun. You know, you just enjoy. I was doing a big pastel there working. Now you can paint pastels onto an acrylic ground as well. So if you paint your watercolour paper with an acrylic ground, that gives you a nice surface to work on. But don't use acrylic too thickly or it'll resist the pastel. So a dark ground's lovely to work on a watercolour paper. 3 hours in the freezing wind in the Hebrides. Yeah, but you feel you've achieved so much and you actually gain so much being there. Working from photographs when I have to, so for figures, for the flower gardens, for things like that, big abstract, for things like that, it's fun. But it's such a different way of painting. And of course, if you're there with the sheep, if I was actually painting this with a sheep there, I'd be getting a lot more out of it now, I'm sure. But equally, I'm treating it as if I were there. And I suppose that's one advantage I've got, and I've said this quite often, is that because I have painted so much from life, when I'm doing something like this, I've got the resource in my mind to come back on, to know if I'm, you know, to paint it like I would out there, with that same sort of liveliness. And
I think one of the problems for us poor amateurs is that the light changes.
That's why you've got to get it done so quickly.
And shadows are changing.
You've only got 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
But using this method, you've seen what I've done in half an hour or so. And the same with the oil painting way that I've shown you. Block in the backgrounds, get rid of the white, or use a coloured ground on your canvas to start, get rid of the white stuff. Constable used a deep umber ground, or a sienna. And if you look at some of his studies, you'll see the branches aren't painted in, the light's painted in, and the branches are left behind. Very, very rapid way of working, you see. And umber's a lovely colour to work on, as is sienna. Ochre is too. So maybe try that for a landscape sometime, let it fit in a brown and just, you know, leave your brown showing through and work it up that way. There's lots of rapid ways, and it's nice to paint light onto the dark as well. It's very nice to do that.
Do you ever finish any of your outdoor sketches back in the studio as well?
Yes. Now there are 2 I did last year. I did a triptych of the waltz where I painted it in the studio first from photographs and worked it up. And it was very dull. So then I went out there with the oils and finished it out there. Equally the other way around, there's one I did out there from the same spot just as a single canvas, and then the light changed before I could get into half an hour into it. And I had no choice, so I had to go home and use the photographs and really push the colours, even on the computer, to get myself there. So it works both ways. Yeah, it's good fun. Yeah. No, don't be limited. Just as it, keep your mind open, really, and try different things out. Yeah, there's no one right way, is there? There's so many ways that things can be done. I don't know how much more further I want to go, because I can keep fiddling with it. I quite like it loose and lively like that. And it's personal taste, isn't it? You might prefer it.
So does that picture have to be fixed now?
I don't. If you want to fix them, why bother with expensive fixative? Hairspray is perfectly good. Now, British Airways and USA Airways, when I went abroad once, they wouldn't let the oils on, they would the acrylics. They wouldn't let my fixative spray on, but they would ladies' hairspray. If you're travelling abroad, be careful about what you're taking. Ask the airlines beforehand, because you might get halfway with one lot of stuff and then the other airline will say you can't take it. If you mount something with a double mount, never have pastels on their front. If you want to carry them, put them between either newspaper or better still tracing paper for just storage. Providing you bash them well when you're finished and you never lay them on their front, they're always vertical on the back, you shouldn't have a problem of the stuff coming off. My problem is I've got so many pieces mounted in cellophane, and the cellophane bashes against it and people, bash them about, and of course it gradually messes up a mount, and they're quite expensive because I use proper acid-free card. So I don't know, the actual answer to that is no, I don't spray mine ever. And if I use water with it, I don't need to anyway. So, but there's not that much. I mean, there's not a bit of pastel on the floor there.
No.
It's for you. I was going to joke about that tonight and say, please turn all your phones off. Always one. It's worse than a funeral.
It's because I'm chauffeur, isn't it?
But what I'm giving you is the choice. I'm showing you how it can be done. And how tightly you want to paint is up to you.
If you'd done that picture only in pastel, would it look a lot different to what it is now?
Yes. It would have a softer... I'm being quite harsh with it. If I was doing this just as a pastel, because there's so many ways of painting the pastel. If this was the traditional pastel technique, the other thing to watch as well is no paper is colour fast. So those pastel papers, if you want to leave the colour showing through, that's unwise. If you want to have colour showing through, give your paper, which is why watercolour paper is quite useful, give your paper a coat of paint that will be colour fast, like acrylic. In your lifetime it might not happen, but we've even used these expensive pastels and we've done tests in sunlight, leaving a piece of paper across, and even after 5 or 6 weeks we find there's a difference in colour in those. The best watercolours still, so they don't like sunlight. So my suggestion is that if you want to do a traditional pastel and have the colour showing through and leaving the colour showing through, it's dodgy using the pastel papers and leaving those showing through. You're better to coat it. Now you can stretch pastel paper just the same as watercolour paper, remember. If you want a really flat surface, you can't use water paint on it in the same way as you can with watercolour paper, but you can stretch it at least if you want it really flat. So the effect would be different because I would block and blend. I block in all my colours first and blend them, and then I work the pastels over the top. Pastel works by being a very fine pigment like watercolour, and the pigment reflects light. So if I put a bit of colour on like that, and I smudge it, it's dead. If I then go over the top, look how bright that is. That's reflecting the light and it's pure. So I deaden my first coats by blending them, and then I'll work up my succeeding coats by either scumbling or putting it directly on as I'm doing now and leaving them alone. Because if you touch them or blend them, they'll die. And that's the same with fixative. Fixative will take the whole painting down, the lights by 2 tones, which is not really very, if you've got highlights, you've lost them, haven't you? So I'm not very keen on fixative, you've asked me. Once painting a sunrise at Bridlington Harbour, and it was very, very orange, really bright, and I couldn't have more orange, more cadmium, more... And I suddenly, well, you prat Pete, what are you doing? You know, instead of putting all the warms on, put the cooler on. Use the opposites, rough against smooth, light against dark, warm against cool. So I started plonking in these cools and suddenly the warms shot out at you. Make sure it's very often not the thing that you think is wrong in your painting that is wrong, it's something nearby. And you're busy trying to get this thing right, it won't go right, and it's not that, it's another colour there. If you wanted to paint a guy in a fluorescent jacket, you wouldn't paint fluorescent paint on. If you want to paint silver in a pot, you don't paint silver paint on. You paint the right colours one to another. If you want that fluorescent jacket, then you've got to put the opposites in the colour circle around it. So you're painting rape. I had somebody come to paint rape the other day. I said, I want a purple sky, please. What do you mean purple sky? I said, it's the opposite to the yellow. You see what happens? And we started to get purple in and around the landscape, and the rape just went pow, you know. You've got to use this colour chemistry, as I've been doing here, even with the warm and warm and cool blues. I'm using warm and cool blues. In fact, I'm using a little bit of green now as well into this, just to make those blues seem even bluer. In fact, I used a bit of green on a sheep, green sheep. I was painting green cows in New Zealand for the kids. And it was, when you're using acrylic inks, you've got to keep them wet, because once acrylic ink's dry, that's it, you can't move them. You can lift watercolour out, but acrylic inks won't. And this green cow I was doing with all the dark colours, and you have to have a diffuser to spray to keep it wet. And of course, like you said, I'm working on the vertical, and one spray too much is all it needs, and the cow just went down here, and just repaint it in afterwards. So, do you think you've learned a bit tonight? Some ideas?
Yeah.
As I say, you tell me what you want another time, whatever it is, for painting knife or rollers. I made great fun recently using rollers for backgrounds, like that pheasant one. It was painted by using roller at first. Did a very soft background, and then sponging up, and then the brushes and progressively building up. Do you think I should add any more to it? What do you think?
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that about enough of me?
As good as it is.
Too dark bits there. Yeah, just a few little dark bits now, just to enhance that light against the dark. Go down to the sheep here. This is what I mean about the fencing match. You've got to get back, and then you go back in again, and layering it up, playing the warms against the cools. And now just a few marks can totally change things. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I think you've had enough of me tonight. Now's your question time then, yeah?